Today we will be looking at the differences in public schools and charter schools. First, what are the differences? So, there are differences in a variety of areas between public schools and private schools. One of the first that I'm going to note is funding. So, for your traditional public school, funding is based on taxes, whether that is federal funding for special education or state funding, or specifically, a large bulk of funding comes from local taxes, which is primarily from property taxes, meaning that some areas might receive more and other areas might receive less. For charter schools, on the other hand, funding, while they do receive some state funding, they do not rely on that local funding like public schools do. So they actually have to seek outside funding, outside of the government, outside of taxes. And so part of the funding that allows them to operate is by seeking support and help from other businesses and other profit organizations that help fund the school. So the next thing is design. The design of the schools are widely different. So for your traditional public schools, generally speaking, they all are designed the same. They are straightforward. One is often the same as the next. However, the design of charter schools is designed in a way that they are different. They are supposed to be innovative, ahead of the curve, so to say. They are where you can trial and error to see what would work and what doesn't work. And they were designed to be innovative and partner with the traditional public school to provide insights about current practices and what works. Operations are also different. So, for operations with your traditional public school, you have your administration, yes, but ultimately they're governed by that school board. With charter schools, they can be founded by really anyone. So anyone can found a public school. They have to go through those requirements as to see if they are able to be founded. But once they're founded, they typically don't have a school board. They might have a board of directors or some other governing aspect, but it looks differently. The curriculum also looks differently. So, traditional public schools, they are required to follow state regulations, state curriculum, all of those things. However, charter schools, since the design is different, they're designed to be innovative, they can play around more with what the curriculum looks like. Admission is also different only in the sense that um, charter schools only have a certain number of spots available. Admission to public schools, anyone can attend, but charter schools often have limitations about the number of students they can attend. So, a lot of times, while they might require an application, they mainly admit on a first come, first served basis. So now looking at how they are same, the tuition for both are the same. They are free to everyone. The accountability is also the same. They are both still accountable for the state guidelines. The accountability does look differently because charter schools are also accountable to um, their specific guidelines for the reason they were opened, and they are accountable to whatever governing agency is over them. But both of them are accountable for state testing. Both have to participate in state testing, and both are accountable for those scores. And both are accountable to meet those adequate yearly progress guidelines that are set up for by federal or the state. So both have positive impacts on the community, and positive impacts about reasons you should attend both. So looking at charter schools first, they charter schools are an alternative to your low performing public schools. They also offer more flexibility. They are not so much as set in their ways as public schools, and charter schools also differ one from the next. They, generally speaking, they might jump from one thing to the next in terms of trying to find the best practices. And also in that same way, finding the best practices means that they are innovative. They are supposed to be trying the new things, and so they are staying ahead of the curve on educational practices. Typically speaking, they also have small class sizes and community involvement. A big part of charter schools, and the reason that they came about was because of this community involvement piece. They are supposed to be problem solving for the community that they are in. Now, looking at public schools, the positive impacts, they are traditional. So everyone knows what kind of to expect whenever they go to a traditional public school. Everyone can attend. There's no cap on the number of students that can attend. They have certified teachers, which typically goes along with better education, but also not necessarily. They also, typically speaking, have better resources than charter schools because of the funding discrepancy that exists. So, better resources, which then means their special education services are also very well maintained. They've been established longer, and so they, in terms of like the special education services, they just have a better foundation than charter schools have. And they also have a lot of extracurricular activities that charter schools may or may not have, depending on where they're located at and where, what their priorities are. Now for the negative impact. So for charter schools, they have a low teacher retention. And actually, as much as 25% of teachers in charter schools are likely to leave in the middle of the school year. So that is a negative impact. They also, if they do not meet the requirements, that means that there's a closing of the schools, and that might happen in the middle of the school year, even in the middle of the day. The availability is also low. A lot of times there is a larger demand for public schools, I mean, for charter schools, than there are availability. So that means there's high waiting lists, and also, typically speaking, charter schools exist in urban areas. So rural areas and even some suburban areas, they don't have the option of charter schools. Their special education services have also been a downside, just based on current research. The special education services just aren't up to par compared to public schools. So now, looking at public schools, the negative impacts, they are traditional. So and I actually said this is one of the positive impacts and one of the negative impacts. So they're traditional, meaning that they can get stuck in their ways, and they are not leading in innovation like we see these charter schools are supposed to. They also typically have larger class sizes, which mean less of that one on one time and less individualized instruction to really meet the struggling students, but also your high achieving students can sometimes get left behind in these large class sizes. The funding is also a negative impact, just in the sense that one public schools within a matter of 30 minutes can vary widely based on their funding because of those local taxes that they incur, which leads me to the next topic of discrepancies. So yes, there's discrepancies in funding between public schools, but we there exists this idea that public schools are supposed to be created equal, and that if you go to one public school, if you transfer out and go to another public school, that they should be the same. However, that's not what we see because of the funding discrepancies and just the discrepancies that exist from one school to the next. There's not this uniform ideal school that is going on with public schools, and so they vary widely, where we see one public school might be overachieving and serving a different demographic, whereas another school district might be low performing and underserved communities. So, and sometimes it even varies within the schools that are in a single district. So, there's just a lot of discrepancies that can exist in public schools. Another discrepancy that you see is just the discrepancy between the minority students depending on your school district. So I think it speaks loudly that a lot of the minority students are seeking out charter schools. Charter schools have a very high population of African American or Black students and Hispanic students, and so there's this discrepancy or unmet requirements for public schools and servicing these students, because these are our students that we are seeing seek out alternative options, and it's not necessarily just in one area. It's kind of across the board in our urban settings that where charter schools are available, it is there for servicing our minority students. And that's because there's this discrepancy with how public schools are educating and how they are servicing our minority students. So, for my own personal values, how they align with the charter schools, I think first I need to just point out that I have actually attended charter schools and public schools, and I have also worked in both charter and public schools. So, I stand in this weird position because I see both the benefits and the downfalls of each one. So, as far as my personal value goes, I actually really love charter schools. The idea that they can be innovative and search for these best practices are absolutely amazing. We can be ahead of the curve, and they offer an alternative to underperforming public schools that I think is just necessary. There's also a better focus on the whole child, I believe, at charter schools, to where, yes, a lot of them are minority students, but they do a better job at looking at the reasons why students are doing what they're doing, to where if they are acting out, they're looking at what is going on at home or what is going on emotionally, to where they that would cause them to act out. And there's just also a better focus, I believe, of like your social emotional learning and just focusing on the whole child rather than just academically. A big thing that aligns with me in regards to my personal values in public schools is the requirement of teacher certification. Whenever I was at a public school, I have attended a public school where it's very low income, and so it was a hard time to get highly qualified teachers. So I had teachers who were not certified teachers, and there was a big discrepancy between the teachers who were certified and the ones who were not. So I personally value certified teachers, not to say that if you're not a certified teacher that you are not a good teacher, but I think that pedagogy knowledge is important to do to be the most effective educator and to really be innovative and the best practices for education. So that's one thing that aligns, and just the resources that are available at public schools, whether that is for English language learners or the special education. Those resources that are available are really can make or break a school system. And so I've seen where they have not been available and where they have been. And a lot of times, public schools have these resources that are more available and can better meet the needs of the students. So I see the viewpoints of both public schools and charter schools, and my value, my even my own personal values align with both in dramatic ways because I have both attended and taught at, worked in both public and charter school. So it's not to say that one is better than the other, but really it comes down to personal preference in your own ideas and how you learn. Because one is varies widely from the other, and charter schools, they are innovative and they do come up with new ways to do things, but that also might not aid your own personal learning style the best way. So it all comes down to what you prefer.